Today, we're going to welcome George Ogier to the Tech Success podcast. So welcome, George. Do you want to give an overview of yourself, your experience, a sort of 2-minute snapshot?
Yeah, absolutely. So I currently work in the charity sector, but that's been quite a career change for me. I have worked predominantly in the retail sector, but took a chunk of time out to be a stay-at-home dad. So during that time, I sort of did some freelance writing and did some social media management, even dipped my toe in the recruitment world, generally working for friends and doing stuff that sort of fitted around what the kids needed as much as anything. But now they're older, I decided to go back to full-time work. So I'm now in the charity sector with working alongside community-owned businesses in largely rural areas. So yes, we live in a rural area ourselves. We're just on the edge of the Cotswolds, just outside Oxford. It's me, my wife, and my 2 kids.
Wonderful. Well, welcome today. I suppose what we use our platform for is to educate both candidates, clients, and, a further reach of kind of tech specialists out there. So we're going to be talking around kind of one element of ED&I today. And if you're comfortable with the first question, I'll pose it to you. Would you be happy to tell us how your employer has changed working practices to accommodate your disability?
I don't know that they've necessarily changed working practices. What I've found is they've been just super flexible and amenable in general. It didn't feel like there had to be a massive ground shift for these things to happen. But even from the interview onwards, it was made very clear that if I was successful and the office needed to sort of change the physicality of it, there's 2 floors in our office. We tend to work upstairs, but the offer was made very clear that if we needed to and I was a successful candidate, they'd quite happily move everybody into the downstairs space to make life easier for me. They've even to the little things on my first day. I remember my department manager saying, "Oh, because I had a stick, she thought it might be best if I had a desk against the wall so I could lean my stick against something so it was out of the way." In terms of getting around, because I'm quite often going to meet groups and meet corporate partners as well, they're very good about travel expenses. So sort of where you might normally expect a colleague to take the tube, they're happy to cover taxi expenses and things like that. I've never felt like that it was an inconvenience for them to do any of this. Prior to going back to full-time work, when I was still working full-time before we had kids, it was never expressly stated, but I often felt that with certain organisations I'd worked with, it felt like it was a bit of an imposition or a bit of a hurdle they had to get over. It was never really seen as being a welcoming thing. It was like, oh, well, we'll have to change this. We'll have to do this. We'll have to do this. But this is going back 15 years ago now, and thankfully things have changed. But my current organisation have been absolutely superb. They've just made me feel valued, I think is the right word, in terms of being a new team member coming on board. I'm feeling comfortable and confident enough to ask for things where I might need help. I mean, I'm quite mobile. I'm quite lucky in my disability that I can move around a fair bit, but there are days when I have good days and bad days, and they're very flexible and very comfortable with kind of being open and talking about those things.
Brilliant. And it's great that you see kind of employers producing more inclusive environments. That's wonderful to hear. So have you heard of other policies that clients have implemented to make organisations more inclusive for disabled colleagues? Have you heard of any on the vine?
Well, I did some digging into this, and one of the things that came up time and again was this idea about unconscious bias. And one of the issues people have, and it's not just about disability or race or sexuality, we all like to put things in a box and everything's sort of labelled, and that's how we understand the world. And that leads to unconscious bias. I'm sure you're well aware. But what organisations are trying to do now is bring in training around unconscious bias and making people aware that it exists and how you can counteract that. Because Scope, the cerebral palsy charity, did a study recently about, I think they said it was to kind of try and halve the disability employment gap. So the number of disabled people who are able to work against the number of able-bodied people who are able to work, and making that gap smaller, because it's, I think 50% of disabled adults are currently working, whereas it's 81% of non-disabled people who are currently in work. And one of the things their study threw up is 1 in 3 people thought that disabled people were less productive than non-disabled people in the workplace. Now, it's quite a sobering statistic, but if I look at it rationally, I can understand why, because there's not a lot of education around disability, and this is where that unconscious bias thing comes in. So I think if you can explain to your team where it contains non-disabled people, why this is such an important thing to look at in terms of how we view the world. So you might put in sort of training opportunities, you might do sort of webinars and things like that. Just the whole core of this is about understanding and valuing each other as people, and working out how we can all fit in together, and helping people to fulfill their potential, whether they're disabled or non-disabled, and having a better world understanding through the unconscious bias training is only going to help that to improve over time.
Brilliant. And I think that we do a lot of work internally, actually, linked to that. We do kind of onboarding training around kind of ED&I. We do kind of lunch and learns. And I think that's really imperative, isn't it? Kind of moving forward. So moving on to the next question, would you explain to our listeners about the Disability Confidence Scheme?
Yes, it's not actually something that my organisation is currently part of, but I have looked into the disability confident work. And it's a government programme essentially designed to encourage employers to hire and keep people with long-term health conditions or disabilities. And it is a number of resources and self-assessments that are free to access for organisations to use. And again, it's just about that idea of building up your knowledge base and understanding as part of your team's training to try and create a more inclusive workspace. It's, as I say, it's free resources that groups can lean on to make themselves more aware of the issues that are needed around creating disability inclusive workspaces.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think it's something that we're looking into ourselves, actually, at the 10th Revolution Group. And I suppose last sort of final point, really, would you be able to highlight what TRG could do as tech talent firm to promote ED&I, focusing on attraction of candidates and providing inclusive environments? What's your thought?
Well, I mean, from my conversations with you in the past, Catherine, I think you have got your fingers on so many of these particular pulses. But I think looking at it from my point of view, a lot of it comes from where you are hiring your prospective candidates from. We all know, particularly in recruitment, about sort of Indeed and all the other job boards that we use on the day-to-day. But there are lots of non-profit organisations that are looking at getting disabled people back into work. There's university programs that work on those things as well, and there's employment agencies that specifically work with people with disabilities as well. So I think it's just making sure that you diversify the places in which you're looking for talent, and just actively saying, are the people that we're engaging with to find new talent, are they on the side of people with disabilities, in terms of making sure that they've got a good spread of available candidates, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I think the education piece we can get involved with regards to producing inclusive environments as well. So fingers crossed, all of this going out onto kind of social media, etc., all helps, doesn't it? Building kind of the education and the kind of platform knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that you and I are having this conversation, we probably wouldn't have done it 10 years ago. So I think we're really moving into a space in which disabled people aren't necessarily something that you might watch once every 4 years on the Paralympics because it makes you feel good, or voting for them on Strictly because of the extra struggles they've had to overcome to get onto the dance floor, which are all perfectly valid things. But I can't run very fast and I'm a terrible dancer, but I'd still like to be valued as a person. And I think this is only going to help myself and people like me to feel more like more part of society, I should say.
Wonderful. I really appreciate your kind of insights today, George. Look forward to
Thank
welcoming
you.
you back in the future.
Love to. Thank you so much, Catherine.